Hello and welcome to the Voice of Iron. And on this session, I'll be reading and ranting about the Vulcan medium Battlemech. First, I'll be going over the canon information that we have on the Vulcan from SARNA.net, and then I'll be giving my personal thoughts and experiences with this mech. Description: the Vulcan was designed as an anti-infantry mech in 2775, during the closing years of the Ameris Civil War. As the SLDF battled Republican troops in the streets and thoroughfares of the Terran hegemony, many mechs were destroyed by dug-in infantry during these urban battles. In response to this problem, Mather Techno Incorporated designed the Vulcan to pack weaponry capable of taking out large numbers of enemy troops and capable of unparalleled mobility in an urban environment, though not intended to engage in all-out battles with larger mechs. The Vulcan's distinct profile would eventually give rise to its nickname, Scarecrow. Production of the Vulcan began as soon as Mather Techno's factory on Northwind was liberated by the SLDF, with Alexander Kerensky himself specifically ordering their production lines converted to produce the Vulcan. The design's baptism of fire came during Operation Liberation, the final battle of the Civil War to liberate Terra from Stefan Amaris, where it served as part of the volunteer regiments and earned its reputation as a tough city fighter. Each of the great houses had a sizable number of Vulcans at the start of the First Succession War, when, just a few months into the conflict, Mather Techno's factory on Northwind was destroyed. Only the Lyran Commonwealth and Free Worlds League managed to acquire the design specifications for the Vulcan and keep it in limited production throughout the rest of the Succession Wars, with the League awarding the schematics to Nimikachi Fusion Products Limited and the Commonwealth giving theirs to Coventry Metalworks. Of the other great houses, the Capellan Confederation had the fewest number of Vulcans as a result of the loss of Sappho, where the majority of their Vulcans were stationed, to House Merrick during the Second Succession War. The Federated Sons kept their Vulcans going thanks to several spare parts supply dumps located in their territory, and used the mech extensively during their conquest of Cantares IV. The majority of the Draconis Combine's Vulcan inventory was used during a raid on Dobson in 3020, where they decimated several key Davian aerospace fighter bases. Following the recovery of several Lost Tech components, Nimikachi was able to create a new variant, the VT-5M, and begin limited production in 3050, eventually increasing their lines to produce 20 a month. Coventry Metalworks produced their own upgrade variant around the same time, the VT-5S, which played a pivotal role during the Fedcom Civil War as part of the Allied forces. The Word of Blake purchased a number of Vulcans in preparation for their seizure of Terra in 3058, codenamed Operation Odysseus. The Blakeists would go on to seize more Vulcans after the start of the Jihad, following their sacking of Nimikachi's Tematagi plant in 3069, with many transferred to the Protectorate Militia for policing duties. Weapons and equipment. The VL-2T Vulcan's primary weapons are a Firestorm Flamer mounted in the right arm and a Sperry Browning machine gun in the left arm, fed by 1 ton of ammunition stored in its left torso. To give it some anti-mech firepower, the Vulcan was given a reliable Armstrong autocannon 2 with 1 ton of ammo, both mounted in the right torso. However, it performed poorly in this regard and was most often employed as an anti-building weapon. A Randell medium laser in the left torso served as a backup weapon for the autocannon, while 10 heat sinks are used to keep the mech cool. Its one true deficiency was the lack of manipulative hands, limiting its ability to engage in close combat fighting with other mechs. The Vulcan is lightly armored at only 5 tons, though this is typically sufficient when facing infantry forces, and its narrow profile makes it a harder target to hit. A cruising speed of 97.2 km per hour is enhanced by 6 jump jets mounted in the rear of the Vulcan's torso, specially vented to reduce heat buildup, giving it a jumping range of 180 meters. Variants. The VL-5T. One of the most common of the Vulcan's early variants, the The 5T was introduced by Mather Techno a year after the original model debuted. It removes the autocannon 2 and replaces it with 3 Maxim medium lasers, 2 heat sinks, and using the remaining mass saved to add 2 additional tons of armor. The majority of the Federated Suns Vulcans were 5T models. The VT-5M Vulcan is an upgrade of the 2T version used by House Merrick that makes the mech far more effective in close-range combat. The mech uses a Crucius II Deluxe Endo Steel chassis and removes the autocannon for a Tronel PPL-20 large pulse laser, and also upgrades the medium laser to a Tronel 12 medium pulse laser using an LFN Linbald and Flametech brand machine gun and flamer respectively. 11 double heatsinks were also incorporated. This version of the Vulcan began production in 3052 and ceased only with the destruction of Nimikachi's Tematagi plant in 3069. The VT-5S Vulcan is a 3050 upgrade of the 2T version used by House Steiner, which replaces the standard fusion engine with an extra light engine, and also upgrades the armor to Lexington Limited high-grade ferrofibrous with case to protect itself from ammunition explosions. The inclusion of mask enables the 5S to move up to 129 km per hour in short bursts. Additionally, the autocannon 2 has been replaced with an Imperator Ultra Autocannon 5. The VT-5SR. This Jihad-era field refit carries 2 extra heatsinks and a plasma rifle, while retaining the medium laser, machine gun, and flamer. Outfitted with mask, the mech could escape with a short speed boost from a dangerous situation. The VT-6C. The 6C was produced by the Word of Blake starting in 3070, so that their Vulcans could be integrated in a C3 network. This upgraded version of the 5M swapped out the lasers for an ER large laser, ER medium laser respectively. This upgraded version of the 5M swapped out the lasers for an ER large laser and ER medium laser respectively. The weight saved was used to install a C3I computer. The removal of a heatsink allowed for the replacement of the machine gun with 3 light machine guns linked to a machine gun array. The VT-6M. Another upgrade of the 5M, this variant was produced by Nimikachi before their plant was destroyed, though only around 30 of these mechs were produced and most were captured by the Blakists. The addition of a 240XL engine allowed engineers to swap out the lasers for an ER medium and a light Gauss rifle with a generous 2-ton ammunition bin. Its armor was upgraded to 5 tons of Star Slab 1D light ferrofibrous to improve protection, especially around the arms. And finally, the VT-7T. In light of collapsing Vulcan sales due to increasingly stiff competition, representatives from Coventry reached out to Nimikachi executives to organize a technical summit. The resulting 7T was a blend of strengths from prior models. It carries a plasma rifle, a heavy machine gun, a heavy flamer, and an ER medium laser. It maintains the 240XL engine and light ferrofibrous armor layout while adding a targeting computer, and it carries a half-ton of heavy machine gun ammunition, a single ton of heavy flamer ammunition, and 2 tons of plasma rifle ammunition. Finally, all Vulcans have the narrow/low profile design quirk. And now, for personal notes. This is an interesting design. I went into it knowing that the Vulcan was not a particularly good mech, but unlike the Blackjack, which I felt tended to overperform, this mech far more fit into a different role. Controversially, I'm going to state that the Vulcan isn't a bad mech, but it does fall within what I've come to call the 40-ton curse. You see, when it comes to most mechs, around 3025 especially, that fit within the 40-ton bracket, they're not usually great against other mechs, and I'll elaborate on that in a minute in regards to the Vulcan, but in particular, things like the Cicada are ridiculously fast, but also seem more like an exaggerated light mech. The Assassin quite literally is just an upgraded light mech meant to take the place of something like the Wasp or the Stinger, and yet it's 40 tons, so it's very overweighted for its role, and then on making it, a little too expensive for what it's supposed to do. And the good old Vulcan here, well, it's 40 tons, and its primary variant is armed with an AC-2 as a anti-mech weapon. Or so it says. You see, I've found that the Vulcan comes with a couple of pros and cons. I'll start with the cons, since I seem to be starting on the more negative side of things. The 2T is fragile, and as I might have indicated, the 2T is not very good at anti-mech combat. Heck, pretty much all variants of the Vulcan are pretty fragile, but that does go with its weight class. It's not necessarily a failing of variants like, say, the 5T, which does up-armor itself a little better for being that fragile for the role that it has, but I'll get to that in a moment. The general pros of the Vulcan is that the 2T is actually surprisingly great for raids against bases and structures. Fun fact, I did not read ahead this time. I did not look at the SARNA article before sitting in the cockpit myself in MechWarrior 5 and trying this thing out. And I found that it was great at raids and building destruction, picking things off at a distance and using my AC-2 to kind of decimate buildings piece by piece. And funny enough, the SARNA article mentioned that, so hey, yay for that. The 5T, for pros, has a pretty phenomenal damage output from those 4 medium lasers, and the machine gun and flamer still allow it to be great at harming soft targets. Those are the general pros and cons that I found, but to elaborate a little bit more, what I mentioned earlier about it's not very good at anti-mech combat, I still think that it's pretty good for what it's designed to do. You'll notice that it was originally commissioned, around the end of the Ameris Civil War for taking down soft targets in the city. Infantry were harassing mechs far more than they were before. Insurgency was a big problem, and especially, destruction of targets like buildings are something that this thing is very good at handling. It's fantastic in a raid, it's good at taking down infantry, and even things like, tanks and hovercraft and the like are all within the purview of what this thing is very, very good for. It's fast enough to where it can outmaneuver most threats that aren't other mechs, and it's got the range from that AC-2 to take down a lot of structures and buildings without ever having to get within brawling range of other threatening things, meaning that, like, if you need to destroy a fuel tank, right? Like, you're on a raid mission, you need to destroy a fuel tank within the walls, you can jump up with those 6 jump jets, snipe that fuel tank, and then be out of there faster than anything can catch up to you and hurt you, or at the very least, by the time something does catch up with you, it's usually a 20-tonner or a light mech that you can either survive or outgun. And this is especially true in terms of outgunning, at least, for the 5T. Not so much the jumping and sniping, but the 5T has its own strengths. It actually is okay at taking down mechs, especially when you're taking it to punch down. So if this were, like, say, the lead of a light lance, the 5T is a pretty good thing to bring along. Ultimately, the Vulcan is one of those mechs where it fits into the universe well because it's a little niche. It was designed to solve a problem. Soft targets, infantry, tanks, and buildings that need to be taken down in urban environments. It's an incredibly high jumper. It's literally just below that broken jumping 7 threshold that something like the Spider holds domination of. It's light enough to where it can outmaneuver most other mediums with very little issue, and that's before mask comes into play. The Lyrans had a good idea giving this thing mask. It could use it. And once you swap that AC-2, it's really not that bad at destroying other mechs. It's got the same sort of laser loadout as a Javelin at the same speed, better jumping, and it has machine guns and a flamer to both help to overheat and pepper that target at the same time that you're using the lasers, if they make the mistake of getting too close. Can't really melee, I mean, that's the problem with this thing, but with that narrow profile, your speed, and other things like that, you are going to be able to usually outrun things that can outgun you, and you can usually outgun things that could, match or be greater than your own speed. So ultimately, while I certainly understand why people call it a bad mech, because it is bad at mech versus mech combat, if you actually bring this thing to missions like raids, like anti-infantry, or if you take it through an urban environment that's crawling with anti-mech teams of infantry, this thing is actually really scary. Also, have to say, I'm partial to the nickname of Scarecrow. Love me some spooky content, so the idea of this thing just appearing in the middle of the night and you see this scarecrowish outline that hunts down smaller forces like infantry. I mean, that's gotta be terrifying. Imagine if you're driving a hover tank into something like a harasser, right? Down the street. And you're going through, you're doing your patrol, and you suddenly see this 2.5 story tall scarecrow-like hunched entity come at you, spitting flames and peppering fire. And yeah, AC-2s aren't that scary to big mechs, but like giant shells hitting you as this thing is nearly a kilometer away. I mean, it's just getting closer. Heck, flying through the air on billows of smoke, that's horrifying. And I like it. So, in anti-mech circumstances, Vulcan's not your first choice. Wouldn't do that. But for a raid, or for, destruction missions where you gotta take down targets like buildings and whatnot, and anti-infantry urban operations especially, this thing is a pretty good machine. Fits within the 40-ton curse when it comes to other mech forces, but really, especially if you're playing mixed tech, and I recommend you play mixed tech, please. Using more than just mechs allows you to really see mech designs like this that don't shine in standard mech v mech Battletech. Vulcan is a good machine for what it brings to the table and for what it's supposed to do, for what it's designed for, that niche. It's a good machine, so don't take it for granted. Give this thing a shot the next time you need to go on a raid. I think you'll like what you find. Anyway, that concludes today's Reading and Rant, and thank you for listening to my voice.